Yes, we are back to analyze or to give you the analytical defense of our previous discussion on the disadvantage of privatizing a church. Now, we want to explain the reasons why we say the church privatization or individual ownership has a disadvantage is this. When you look at the churches that are owned by private individual, churches that private individuals use as a business center, it will continue to flourish, it will continue to boom, and it continues to function properly. But when such an individual that owns the company or owns the church, as the case may be, because since it's owned by individual, it is no longer a church. It is bearing the name, but it's no longer a church. It's a company, a business enterprise, because you derive profit out of it, you derive benefit out of it, and you become rich out of it, which is not done right from the time of old, right from the time of immemorial. Read their scripture very well. Make research. You discover how the early churches planted a church, how they use a church, how they maintain churches. The disadvantage, when such an individual, the owner of that company or the owner of that church is gone, the church will have a spiritual, it becomes spiritually emphasized and physically emphasized. What do we mean? It will continue to downgrade, to depreciate. The church continue to depreciate. Sometimes it will finally collapse. Most of them, they will continue to linger. It will not rise, it will not fall. They remain on a stable stage. Some of them will not even function at all, because it is owned by an individual, because it's a private company, just like a private business organization or a private company, that when the owner of the company is gone, the wife or the children cannot manage it. It will collapse. That is how a church being owned by an individual or being claimed by an individual to become the owner, it collapses like company owns by an individual. Most of the churches, private churches, when they die, they hand over to their wife. Is it a company, that church, that the owner will die and hand over to the wife? Sometimes to the son, sometimes to one of the relations, makes the church to collapse. Now, watch out the churches. For instance, the churches that came into Nigeria at first, or Africa, when the white brought Christianity to Africa, you discover that all those Orthodox churches at that time, Christ brought into Africa, they did not own those churches. They did not privatize it. Neither do they make money out of it. Just as we said in our previous video, that all those churches they brought into the country, they attach it to primary school to educate the people, because the people does not have the primary knowledge of the Bible. They cannot read and write the scripture. They want them to understand the scripture. They want them to understand the principles and the ideology of Bible. Then they have to plant schools. They nurture them. Their resources, they implanted their resources, just like the apostles of old use their resources. In the book of Acts, as we said previously, Acts of Apostles chapter 2, when Paul and his disciples planted a church, they sold their possessions, use it to bring them up, to nurture the souls. That was how the whites that brought Christianity into Africa, they used their resources to bring up the people. They planted primary schools, they educate them. And when they were living as well, they handed over to government, because church is not a private enterprise, not to be owned by individual. So after that, they left. They did not ask individuals to bring returns to them. That is how early church planted, the apostles of old, they follow the principles of apostles of old. They follow the principles of Christ. They follow that method. So when they left, they did not own the church. They planted somebody. They rotate their leadership. When you look at those Orthodox churches today in Nigeria or Africa that rotate the leadership, that no man owns their churches, even the leadership that have been planted there dies. The church continues to blossom. The church continues to flourish. The church continues to grow. Just watch out. Make research. All those Orthodox churches that individual does not own, that does not own by an individual, those Orthodox churches, they continue to stand year by year, even though the leader has been planted there, die, the church continue because they do transfer. They transfer leaders, they brought leader. That was how the whites started the church. Nobody owns it. Those churches have advantage. They continue to blossom. They continue to stand because nobody owns it. That is how church ought to be. But these ones that individual claim, especially the Pentecostal, when Pentecostal came, they break out, use church for business, and they continue to make it a business center. When they die, the business collapse. When they die, the church will not continue. People began to agitate who will not be the leader, who will be there. It becomes a political arena. People begin to fight themselves. Who will now hand over the mantle of leadership? Who will take over the mantle of leadership? The wife will be the owner. The children will be over there. Because you have made it a private business organization. That is why such agitation will be there. So based on this injunction, we are seeing that an individual has no right to own a church, to avoid all this agitation, to avoid the spiritual bankrupt, because as soon as the person leave the church, it cannot function as usual, because some people have been addicted to the preaching, to the teaching of that particular individual. So when the individual is no longer there, they feel biased. They lost their zeal for such mission. Based on this injunction, we see the disadvantage of individual owning a church. Therefore, we are saying that individual ought not to own a church for a better future. No matter the kind of preaching, no matter the kind of teaching, if you have failed already in the administrative use of church, you have already failed God. No matter the kind of preaching, you have already failed the administrative way of handling a church. You have failed God. Based on this injunction, we pause. More explanation available on request.